All right, guys, welcome back to another episode of PPK Perspectives. As you guys know, I have wanted to bring on people that I obviously respect or admire, and also just giving some more Catholic influence out there for the young adults. And I have the pleasure of bringing on probably my favorite Catholic Instagram account, the man behind Saintwave. Thank you for joining.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so this is going to be a blast. We're going to talk about a lot of different things. I'm really excited. If you guys haven't checked out Saintwave, I hope my man gets, 100 more followers or whatever, how many people watch this usually. But he has some really awesome stuff. We'll probably get into some of that and some other things. But first, as if you guys have listened before, I do like to throw out a little icebreaker question. Now, you are a man of the people. You do have some Spotify playlists. Not necessarily stuff. Well, one, I don't have Spotify, so I've been thinking about maybe I should switch over so I could hear your playlist. But I tend to go towards the hip hop direction. Unfortunately, I'm trying to work on that a little bit. But as someone who respects your taste, I have a very good question. I'm very curious. I've asked this before, but I think it just shows so much about a person. If you have 3 movies that you could watch for the rest of your life, now you could always dissect these. It could be based on genre. I tend to lean towards let's hit multiple genres. Maybe it's just your 3 favorite of all time, but I'll let you take the floor with that one.
Okay. That's I consider myself to be a cinephile. I'm obsessed with movies, and it's very difficult to choose that. But, and just a disclaimer, my choice in 3 could change in the next hour. But for right now, I think the 3 that come to mind for me, one would probably be The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. It's just a phenomenal spaghetti western. Sergio Leone, he's amazing, and you notice something new every time you watch it, so I wouldn't get tired of it. Number 2, part of me wants to say Taxi Driver, but I might change that only because maybe I don't want to watch something so disturbing and frustrating for the rest of my life. So I'm going to say The Taking of Pelham 123 from the 1970s, not the remake. And I'm saying that because it's still that 70s gritty New York, but there's a little bit more of a lightheartedness to it. I highly recommend that one.
Okay.
And then the last one, Grease, probably Grease. I've watched it my whole life, and I probably shouldn't have watched it as a kid because you notice real things that just kids should not be watching in that one. But it's such a great movie, and I never get tired of it.
Okay. I've seen Grease, seen Taxi Driver, not The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, and not the original Taken. And I ask this question, and a lot of times I'm like hoping or expecting that I know all the movies because I like to I wouldn't claim to be like a cinephile or anything like that, but I do really enjoy movies, and I think I've done enough to where you start out and you watch like a lot of Fast and the Furious and you're like, wow, you know what I mean? Like there's a little bit more. And then me and my wife had a spree of just Audrey Hepburn, which is really awesome. Things like Roman Holiday and all those kind of stuff was really classic. Taxi Driver is really good. I mean, I think it shows a little bit about you. I think the later you get like into, I mean, maybe earlier, I guess is the right term. I think that guy watches movies. You know what I mean? At least in our generation. Because if it was just Monsters Inc. and something like that, then maybe there'd be a little bit of a little sus there. But anyways, right. Okay. So as we start into this, how about you just give a little people on your background? I don't know if you have, a certain conversion story that you want to share. We haven't discussed too much either, so I'm kind of learning as we go along. But yeah.
Sure. Yeah. So. It's interesting. So I grew up as a Protestant. My mom grew up Protestant in her upbringing, and my father grew up more of a secular Jew. And his conversion happened long before I was born, back in the 70s. And so they passed on their faith to me growing up. I'm one of 6. And It was a great upbringing and just very active within our sort of church community. And I think it really did serve as a good foundation before my conversion. So fast forwarding a little bit later and after college, and I'm already active within my profession and doing a lot of contract work as a designer. I think I went through two conversions, and conversion part one was more political. I was really apolitical, and um, I didn't really invest too much in political thought, and I think it's just because I was so young. But I had always been pro-life, but kind of to a point where it's like I'm pro-life, and I acknowledge that this is in fact a human being. I was taught that very young. My mom comes from an OBGYN background, and this was passed on to us. However, again, this is in my late teens, early 20s. It was just, it was kind of a que sera, sera, vote for whoever you want, and it doesn't really make a difference anyway. At some point, I think I just grew up, and it was that I had to make a choice. Am I going to, do I side more with, and I hate these spectrums, but I'm going to do it anyway because I think it helps. Am I going to go a little bit more to the left or to the right? And I know that it could be a little bit more nuanced than that, but I came to a conclusion that there were just some values that I wanted to hang on to or I wanted to embrace more of. So I got more of a conservative, even libertarian side of this. And again, this is before I officially converted. But I was reading a lot of economists, and I was reading uh, Mises and Friedrich Hayek and Milton Friedman and Thomas Sowell. And one economist, and this is now getting into part two of my conversion, which is into the Catholic faith. One economist I really respected is named Dr. Thomas E. Woods, and he identifies as a libertarian. In fact, he identifies as a anarcho-capitalist, but he is also very much of a Catholic, which I'm still trying to wrap my head around more and more as I'm growing in my faith. But with him, he did a great series, and he wrote a fantastic book called "How the Catholic Church Built Western Civilization." Now, I remember beginning to read it, and I didn't think I was going to get too deep into it. It was more of just that I liked him, and I just wanted to hear his take on it. And I thought it was going to go more into just Austrian economics. That same week, I went out to a bar, and I was with some friends, and there was some girl who was a friend of a friend, and I don't even remember what the conversation was, but she wanted to preface something, and she turned to me and she was like, "You're not religious, are you?" And I was put in a position where I was like, do I say yes or no, actually? Because I'm kind of wayward at this point. I'm not really going to church, and I'm not talking about this, and I haven't prayed in a long time. Not really. And I said no. Now, it wasn't because I was trying to reject God. If she had said, "Are you a Christian?" I would have said yes. But as a Protestant, the whole, this isn't for every Protestant because Protestants are all different. But for me, it was, you're not religious, you have a relationship with Jesus. And there's a big difference. In fact, you don't want to be religious. That was the sort of teaching that we got. So I said no. But I remember sitting in bed that night and just thinking about this. And I was like, why did I say no? Is that actually real? Is that accurate? And then I got to thinking more about hell. And it was just stuck in my head. And I did not go to sleep that night. And I think that was really the beginning. And I wanted to know what's the truth. And it, honestly, I don't think it was so much out of for the love of God that I wanted to dive deeper. It was really for the fear of hell, which is probably not the ideal way of doing it, but I think that it is a way of that many people actually do sort of find God through holy fear. And so I just invested my time into reading backwards, reading current theologians, reading into the reformers and what they believed, and then going into the early church fathers and their commentary on the scriptures. So, as my patron saint John Henry Newman says, when you're steeped in history, you cease to be a Protestant. That's exactly what happened. And then I picked up a rosary one day just out of curiosity, and Mary body slam me, okay, I'm in.
Okay. And as there's a lot there too, because I feel a little bit of the political conversion type thing as well. About what age is this happening? At least the two conversions.
Uh, Early to mid 20s for my
Okay.
first one,
Okay.
which is very less interesting, but there was a bridge between that conversion and the other one, and then I officially entered into the church in my mid 20s.
Okay. All right. So you already been basically what, out of college at that point?
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Okay. Yeah, because I think that's an interesting one. I in my senior year, because my sophomore year of high school, because I'm 21 right now, I'll be 22 in a couple months. My sophomore year of high school was when the whole Trump Clinton thing was happening, and so I thought that it was pretty clear who the like vote would be for my peers, because I found myself in a lot of like these AP class circles and stuff like that. So I'm like, okay, these people are smart. Like we think it's pretty clear that Hillary's like a fraud and a criminal at this point, and I thought that was like gonna be shared by other people. And then I had this conversation where someone was like, you wouldn't like actually vote for Trump, would you?" And I was like, "What do you mean? Like, aren't we, isn't that what we're all doing?" And then when they're like, "Oh no, of course not," and I was like, "What?" And then that was the point for me. I've been like basically cradle Catholic, and then I started to feel like, oh, I actually need to like understand more of, not like, oh, is it wrong? I knew that it was the right choice in that election, but sort of try to go back and say, okay, if I'm going to go and have these conversations with people, I need to be armed with the reasons why I feel a certain way. And so I got big into more politics stuff. I read a lot of Milton Friedman, Thomas Sowell as well. And then obviously the usual, because I'm a, Gen Z, or a lot of Steven Crowder and Ben Shapiro for a while. Then I kind of stopped going that direction. But I want to read that one about the Catholic Church being basically the bedrock of the West, because the anarchist capitalist thing is a little bit interesting, because I've been, for the last, well, I don't even know, last semester when I just graduated till now, I've been really diving into like Chestertonian distributism, which is very interesting to me. Now, this isn't necessarily what the podcast is about, so we will get into that maybe for another time. Okay, yeah. So what I'm curious about too is kind of the direction. I guess a little bit more about like how you got to the place of sort of Saintwave, right? Like I know it seems like that it was something that was kind of in your profession, and then obviously the faith kind of influenced that. But like, how did we get to that point?
Um, I have a lot of experience with design, and initially, when I was in college, my plan was to go into medical journalism, not medical journalism, medical illustration, excuse me, and it switched. I just fell in love um, with branding and marketing and just things related to that, and so that's what I pursued. And so I was doing a lot of work for many years with different, uh, just doing contract work with different retailers and magazines. And I had stuff in Nylon Magazine and at Urban Outfitters, and I was doing stuff for certain television shows. But one thing that I had always wanted to do that I never did was just design what I wanted to design. And there were even times when, and it's funny because this is before my conversion. There were times where I was just not comfortable designing certain content, and they were confused. The people I was contracting with, they're like, "Why can't you just do this one?" And I was like, "I don't know. It's just I don't feel comfortable with it. You're gonna have to pass it to someone else." So over time, I continued to do contract work, and it was I was also doing it as a side hustle. And then a few years ago, I just decided I should just start doing something. And I want it to be low risk because I'm not a risk taker as much as perhaps I should be, but I'm very methodical in what I'm approaching. So it started out with just bumper stickers, and it was just a way for me to create something, and I wanted it to be Catholic. So Saintwave began, and it began with just the "Make the Mass Latin Again" sticker, and then there was also the pro pro woman, pro life sticker as well. And I just kept doing it, and I was having fun, and I was posting it on Instagram, and there started to be a following, and then eventually, a couple years ago, I just started to do more apparel, and that's become really my go-to because I just think it's way more fun. I think people are more enthusiastic about it. I'm enthusiastic about it, and even just for the sake of marketing, uh, and it has nothing to do with the actual sales, but even just creating memes, just as a means to attract people, has been, I think, just the cherry on top. It's just been so much fun. So that's how I got to where I am now. A lot of experience with designing, but wanting to eventually do my own thing, but primarily something Catholic.
Yeah, I think the one where, because what happened, I think, I don't know if it was me or my friend Christian, but he had sent me one of like the memes. And I was like, dude, who is this guy? Like, this guy just gets it in all certain levels. Cause it's like, you have Catholicism or whatever, which is like a very just grimy set
Ryan and
of,
Cruz and all those guys.
yeah. And not as creative in some of the ways. Pretty funny still. Can get kind of toxic, I see in the comments. Those kind of can get wild in those comments. But I was super drawn. I remember the one of the ones that I was like, oh my gosh, this guy's just too good. It was the Tame Impala Taylor Marshall one, and I was like, wow,
Yeah.
that's a masterpiece, dude. That one was so good. And then yeah, but I think a good point. I think that kind of missed an opportunity earlier because as you're in this journey, I think yeah, you're reading church fathers, and then you made a point where one of your stickers is "Make the Mass Latin Again," which I wholeheartedly agree with. But I think I'm just curious a little bit towards like when you're in that process. This is like around the second conversion, and obviously you don't have parents who are practicing Catholics. Like, how are you going through those hoops? I guess we're kind of backtracking a little bit, but like, what are there some major obstacles in the way, or was it like you read the church fathers who like, okay, I'm good with that. Like, I had questions about Mary or the Eucharist, and they answered them.
Yeah, and I think for a lot of people, it's when they go through a conversion, there might be one or two things, or maybe more, that they perhaps can't wrap their heads around, or they don't believe, but they're going to go ahead and proceed anyway because they have every reason to. And so they're almost taking a Pascal's wager approach to it, where it's that they don't really believe it, but they're going to go ahead and live as if they do because they want to, and because the rest of it makes sense too. So for me, I understood where the church came from. I was fully aware that Christ established one church, and then it happened to be the Catholic Church. And so I understood apostolic succession, and I understood the true presence, even though it was still a mystery to me, and I couldn't quite get it. And I think that's how it is, which is why it's a mystery. But I was willing to at least intellectually acknowledge that, and I believed it intellectually. When it came to Mary, it did take me a little while. Not that I didn't want to offer her devotion and honor, but it was trying to figure out how to do it. And it took me a while to actually say her name. Not because it was that again, that I had a problem with her. It was just very different from my Protestant background. I remember talking to my father about this, and he was like, for the first 3 years of my life, I would pray to Jesus, but I wouldn't say his name because I couldn't get myself to do it. It just took some time. And so we had a good conversation about that. But there were just a few things that I knew intellectually, but uh, just this might sound cheesy, but like in my heart, it was a little bit harder to actually get there until finally just really putting that time into prayer, and eventually when I was received into the church, going to the sacraments, it was fully aware to me.
I think one of the things that you can kind of tell already, and that you said it already, is that you're very methodical, and it seems like this kind of carries out in a lot of different ways, and I think it should be that way. One of the ways that, one of the reasons why I wanted to bring you on, one's because I feel like there's not too many sort of Catholic creatives out there that are really trying to sort of like push their boundaries. It seems like we just always hop on a trend 2 years too late, and then we try to like sort of mask it. Like I thought Blessed She did a great job of sort of like capturing the trend of what feminine Instagram looks like, and they've been doing a really good job of that. And we're going to get to the weird part of social media, but I think a question I have is it sort of that same methodical approach towards when you're creating something as simple as apparel or a meme or Taylor Marshall and Tame Impala? Like, do you have those things of like, what message should I get across here? Or is there something, I'm sure some of them are deeper than others, which is, I assume for the Taylor Marshall one, it wasn't that deep. But I think in your process of creating, are there things that you see? Like, what are some inspirations behind it? I know there's a lot of like sort of older vintage era type things that seem to be a big inspiration, as it is for me as well. I'm obsessed with just finding old pictures of saints. That's like my favorite thing to do in the world. And obviously Fulton Sheen, those kind of things. So is that same kind of approach to certain things? Like, what kind of sparks in your head? Okay, I need to create something with that,
Yeah, it's really just the things that I love. I think that's where it began because I love the church and I love my Catholic faith, and I'm so grateful for it that it started there, that I just wanted to do something Catholic. But then eventually I had to think more about what sort of aesthetics do I really want to put in here that's still important. And so I think the biggest influences could be the just traditional iconography, because I still incorporate some of those. And the Saint Joseph Terror of Demons design is probably still the biggest seller, and I think it always has been. But then I also have an appreciation for sort of this 80s yuppie culture. Not necessarily the debaucherous part or the me sort of focus on yuppieism, if we want to call it that, but sort of a tongue-in-cheek look at it. And maybe it's this sort of like leisure culture that you're kind of seeing now, or this leisure aesthetic. But I have always liked it. I always liked the simplicity of it, so I like to put that sort of thing, incorporating it. And then even this sort of hardcore punk era of the 80s, of the Descendants and Black Flag and Suicidal Tendencies and all these guys, I just thought that it made sense to do something of a parody with these, because a lot of, especially young Catholic guys who go through a conversion, a lot of them seem to have a background with this sort of 80s punk era. And I think that what draws them from that into Catholicism is that there's still a distrust of the world that they had in their punk days. They still, when you listen to these songs from the 80s and the Teen Idols and Crass and all of them, it's basically like, I don't trust you, world. You're pitching me something and I'm not going to take it. There's something sinister behind this. And they never get to the next part, which is, oh, it's God, and it's that he loves me, and that there's salvation, and that there's hope. And I think a lot of Catholic guys that do that conversion from punk to that, it's because they actually found the answer that these punk bands didn't. So it made sense to pay homage to that and do a lot of those too.
Yeah, I think I love that so much, because I always, like, we had an episode on the false rebellion of the youth, and you look at the influence of culture from all those bands, obviously, like the Rage Against the Machines or even NWA, that really transformed what rap was to be. And this always like this message of sort of the world's against you, and even to like Kanye, and then I think why obviously Trump had won an election. And it's so fascinating to me, because I'm like, I feel like being Catholics more of like the biggest middle finger to the culture. And we want to like act like, people in the culture are doing that against the Catholics, but it's just really not. I mean, it isn't. It's like you're almost there. I think, I've said this before, but my European history teacher back in high school had told us, like, if you take anything away from this class, it's to question everything. And at first I thought it was like, a classic like lib take on, oh yeah, all this stuff and whatever it be, the societal structure of gender or whatever. I don't know what his intent was in saying it, but I thought that was very true what he was saying, and to find and seek out that why. So yeah, I love a lot of that. I think it comes across so well too. And I think one of the greatest things about the account is that it just feels super authentic. and there's just not a lot that are similar to those, to what you're creating. I have another question too, because I love what you do. I don't know if you know who Oh Blood and Water is. Do you know that? He's a videographer, photographer. He did some
Oh
work for
yeah,
Mask the Ages as well.
yeah. I think I know who you're talking about. He's not the surfer I'm thinking of,
He
or
he did have
I,
one where where he was like surfing with Father Calloway. I don't know if you've seen that video. That
I
video was
did
so sick. Yeah. So
did
he
see
does
that
have
one.
that one.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
he
they're
lives in a
great.
van and he like
Yes.
travels.
Okay,
Yeah.
it's the same
Yeah.
guy. Yeah, he's
Yeah.
excellent.
Yeah. So I think, like I look at you and that guy as like people who are finally kind of like breaking out of this like very non-creative box that our Catholics, us as Catholics, have put ourselves into when we were the one making these massive cathedrals, and then now we just put velvet in everywhere, and it just hasn't been great. And so I look at you guys as such a breath of fresh air, and I'm curious. Although this has become seems like a little like passion project hobby of yours, are there things that you're kind of eyeing down the road to kind of use this? Because I think you're gifted and there's space for it. I think there's potential for collaboration between me and you, but we could talk about that off camera. But do you see like some big projects, or is there anything in the plans of Saintwave, or even outside of that, to use sort of your creative gifts?
I'm still exploring that. I'm kind of taking it month by month or quarter by quarter. I mean, right now I'm just doing the Summer of Saints collection, and that's for this year, and it's already being released. So I'm not thinking too deeply as far as branching outside of what I'm currently doing. Um, no, I mean it's the thing. I think one of the things that I just enjoy about what I'm currently doing anyway is that it's not too serious, which I think is what we need sometimes. And I think we need that in the church. And that doesn't mean that we should be too comfortable or live 100% leisure, but there should still be an appreciation for leisure. God gave that to us. And all I'm trying to do is put some humor into this, where we have the ability to laugh with our Catholic faith, and also look at the appreciation and the foibles within humanity, but the fact that we have joy because we're also saved through our faith and the works that fuel our faith as well. So I it's I think I'm just right now in the meantime trying to keep it light, and I don't have any intention to do anything as heavy. I think Blood and Water is actually going a little bit deeper into that. He actually seems to have a great grasp on what the aesthetics need to be within the church, whereas I'm just sort of just doing something a little bit more parody, but something that is uniquely Catholic, that Catholics would actually get the joke.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you guys are both doing, sort of like only two that I've seen doing exactly what you guys are doing. And I hope to join that crew eventually. Hopefully it'll come in due time. I think one of the interesting points that we can kind of dissect here is social media, because I think it's everyone's like favorite thing to like sort of hate, but then you're all kind of still on it, And I think it's an interesting point where like, there's always the reels and like pictures and posts of all the reasons why social media is bad, but it's like, you're still posting on social media. So there's always that sort of dichotomy with it. But I am curious on your take, because I feel there's so many different parts of social media. Obviously there's the good parts of what we can use. I think you've done a good job of that. I try to do a good job of that through World Ablaze, through PPK. But there's also this like constant pressure and need. I know Matt Fradd's talked about this, to like make posts, and you have to kind of like worship the algorithm a little bit. And there's some things that you have to do. I notice what I like about you a lot is that it seems like you don't really care about times or when people are on. You post when you want to post, which I really appreciate. And I think that's what we should get back to, sort of a Tumblr sort of era of social media. So there's so many different things there, right? Like, and I think I never wanted to, even with the podcast or anything, come out with a podcast for the sake of doing it. And there's so many different things that you have to kind of jump through, and you just want everything to come across as authentic as possible. So I'm just curious on your take overall with like social media, how to navigate those kind of things.
Yeah, it's probably sporadic for me anyway because I have such severe ADHD that I have one idea and then immediately I forget it, but another idea pops in, and it's like I better post this now, otherwise it's not going to happen because I'm going to forget it. So, but maybe that's worked out. Maybe it's been for the best. Um, it's definitely all in moderation, that's for sure, and I think anybody with a brain with half a brain would say that too much of it would be for a bad thing. I do have my pet peeves with it, and maybe it's the TikTok sort of era that we're in, and we're seeing a lot of that crossover into Instagram. And it's not all bad, but for the most part, I'm just like this whole trend again, or this thing. That's just me.
Yeah.
I think my biggest concern with social media, it's not even so much with adults, but there's always concern with adults doing it. But of course, it's with kids. I don't think they should be on it. That's just me. I know that when my wife and I have kids, and hopefully God will bless us with some soon. But when they get to that age, and assuming that social media is still going to be a thing, and they're older, they're not going to be on it. We're not going to let them on it. I don't trust. I don't trust the system to allow kids to do that, and I don't trust people either.
Yeah. I wrestle with that one too. Hopefully, same over here that God blesses us with some children soon. That's a difficult one, and I'm glad we have a lot of time to figure that one out, and we'll see where social media heads. Staying on the social media topic though, like I said, there's some great accounts. I think Blessed is She, Blood and Water, some of these people that I really really like, and I think are doing something that's still authentic and feels like themselves. Obviously, Catholic Connect's a huge one. We mentioned, Basic Catholic Austin does some good stuff. But, part of me, I say this a lot, but I feel like the Protestants really got the hold on the aesthetic piece of Instagram. Now, there's some good reasons for it and some bad reasons for it. But
Yeah.
I'm kind of curious where you see sort of the lack of like our Catholics lacking in some ways in terms of social media in the age that we're in right now. And I know this is a hard question because part of me feels like, okay, I don't want Bishop Barron or let's choose someone that Bishop Strickland. I don't want Bishop Strickland talking like Stephen Furtick in a really nice stage in a setting. I'm not necessarily asking for that, but maybe for the lay people, like I think
Yeah.
there's room to push ourselves a little bit into a point where I think you and I do agree that aesthetics do matter, and there's a lot that you can get out of it if they're used in the right way. And I think Catholics just kind of suck at it to a certain
Hmm.
extent. But then there's also good reason for it, right? I can see the flip side. Well, we don't really care about that stuff. We care about all the good things in life, and those aren't. But for people who you're trying to reach that aren't necessarily have that solid foundation, I think aesthetics or some of these things are a good way, for lack of a better term, good vibes and those kind of things in a post or in a feed can really drop some people in. And so like, do you see an issue there, or are we kind of like in our space and it's the right space for us to be in?
Uh, we might be in the right space only because we don't want to pervert the authentic aesthetics of Catholicism, which would be the icons and the incense and these sort of sacramentals that were given to us because we're humans, and so we're drawn into these things, and it's how we connect to God. I remember a while back, maybe back in 2014 or something like that, there was this guy who did spoken word poetry, and by the way, that's like my least favorite form of poetry. That's just me. Maybe we're opposites of there, maybe not, but it's just it gets under my skin. But he did one, and he's a Protestant, and the message was, I can't remember it off the top of my head, but it was something to the effect of why religion is bad and why Jesus is good.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
I don't
Why I
does,
love Jesus but hate religion, I think is what it was.
that's the one.
Yep.
That's the one.
Yep.
And it was uh, I don't want to put him on blast too much because I really think that his heart was in the right place. I disagreed with it theologically. Some of it made sense, but I don't agree overall with what he was saying. But then I remember there was a response video
Mm-hmm.
from a priest,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't know the priest's name, but he's like a rapping priest. Um, maybe you're more well informed about this guy, but
I
he
remember what
did a
you're talking about. Yeah.
response. He did it in a Catholic in a Catholic chapel, and stained glass was there, and it was a beautiful chapel. But on the other hand, I was like, why are we doing this here? Maybe I'm being too legalistic, but there was just something a little bit weird about it, and I kind of like the idea of keeping that part of it out of. I don't want to say out of the mainstream. That's not a right way of putting it, but just not perverting it too much. And I don't want to accuse him of perverting it either through what he did, but it was just a little bit off. I don't know if we're gonna. I don't know how to get there, but one thing's for sure: the beauty of the church that we have, like aesthetically, is unlike the world, and that's something that we have that even the Protestants don't have.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I completely agree. I see that there can be sort of a mixing. That's why I said, like, I don't really like the sort of reels that we're getting into now where it's like this snippet of a priest's homily, supposedly, but he's looking directly into the camera and it seems like this production thing. And I'm like, we're kind of mixing up two things here and probably sending a wrong message, which is why I said I don't really want to see Bishop Barron doing the Stephen Furtick thing because, they can do that when they just have a stage or something like that. I think Franciscan can get that a little mixed up sometimes. They like to do a lot of masses in a gym and it can get a little weird sometimes. So no, I completely get that. There is one thing of slam poetry type of that I enjoy from 22 Jump Street. I don't know if you've seen that one. That one was pretty good. When Jonah Hill does it.
Yeah, I don't remember that one. I mean, I did see it. It's funny. My wife and I have been watching the TV show lately, like
Oh
the one
yeah,
from yeah, but
with Johnny Depp.
yeah. I don't remember that one,
It
but
was the Cynthia Jesus Dies for Our Cynthias. That was a pretty good one.
yes,
I encourage people to check that out if you're into that spoken word type stuff. But okay, I think this puts us in a really good place for these last few questions I have for you, because I think if we haven't made this pretty clear, there's a lot of sort of space for nuance and sort of obstacles when you're getting into this point of like how much should we look like the world, right? Like take some of the good and then really trying to let the truth be illuminated through that kind of stuff and in truth, goodness, and beauty. And then there's a tricky part of like, well, what is good, right? And I think that's a tough one. And now I think we would both consider ourselves trads. I don't know if you want to give yourself that title. I'm
what
going to
does
give
trad
myself.
mean? I mean, I use the word
Yeah.
and I generally know, but I think there's so many different ways of describing it. How are we going to use the word today?
Okay. I'll let you know how I use it. And I think, what really irritates me is that I don't know how you could not be a trad, which is just short for traditional. Like, I think that's just means Catholic. But for some reason now with, the unfortunate different sectors we have in the church, we have to for some reason say those things. So I would characterize a trad as really just an actual an actual Catholic, or someone, I guess, at a really basic level. It's like you like the Latin Mass essentially, and you kind of want to do away with a lot of the liturgical abuses and things like that. I think that's fair enough, right? We could probably agree on that.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like a glad trad, and then you've got rad trad. So yeah, I mean, I would describe myself as that.
Okay, yeah, we won't get into that. That's a touchy. I like Scott Hahn's glad trad thing. I'm not sure about the characterization of rad trads. I think that can get a little political and that's unnecessary, but I think we can both say we're trad. So my next question is, okay, what is the middle ground between sort of cool and trad? I don't know if you had people maybe like in one of your memes, they're like, "Oh, dude, why are you using that? That's like so a secular thing that you're trying to make." I don't know if that's happened to you. I'm sure maybe it has because people always feel the need to like insert their opinions on social media. But I struggle with this a little bit too. Of like, are you trying to imitate too much of sort of the world when we're not supposed to be looking at it, but then, or not supposed to be living in it? But then it's also like there's some really good stuff. I think we should probably take a little bit more notes from some secular movies so that we could learn how to create better ones, or different things like that, like certain clothing or whatever it may be. There's a lot of room there. So I don't know. It's hard, because the real deep traditions of church would be like, women shouldn't wear pants. So where is that kind of middle ground? It's kind of a tough one to figure out, but here we are in 2022.
Yeah. And I wouldn't be the person my opinion on this would be incredibly fallible. I think at the very least, obviously, it can't be something debaucherous and sinful in an obvious way. So that's something that I wouldn't do. In fact, many times when I have models posing with the apparel that I have, now and then I'll look at something. I'm like, is this really what I want to have displayed on here? And it could be something that looks incredibly innocent. For instance, a woman that's wearing like an oversized sweatshirt, but she's wearing yoga pants. Now, it's not like the yoga pants are like front and center, but she's still wearing them. I'm not a fan of yoga pants. First of all, I'm not a fan of yoga, and I would say stay away from that.
Yeah.
But yoga pants themselves, it's a little bit immodest, and I even have to try to find if there are guys that are wearing it and it's in an immodest way, and so I have to avoid that too. So there's, on one hand, there's that, just certain obvious things, even when it doesn't seem obvious at first. Um, I think on the other hand, a lot of what I'm doing is there is some influence that you would find within the world or that came from the world. I mean, I said earlier that this sort of yuppie aesthetic is an influence, and it's not in celebration um, of a me first mentality, but just sort of an appreciation of the simplicity that I like, and there's sort of a nostalgia element to it, but I wouldn't want to celebrate actual yuppie culture in itself, because there needs to be a little bit of it. I think that it does at some point conflict with our Catholic morality. I guess, okay. So when you say cool, I want to make sure I'm also answering your question. It sounds like you're just talking about like how the world deems cool, or something that's just cool in culture.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll pause there and I'll let you speak, because I think that's sort of a good place to begin. That I there's certain things that I'm not going to include, even if it's something very, very subtle. But there's still an appreciation for things that may have begun in the world, and maybe it's in parody of it, but sometimes it's just more of a very subtle influence.
Yeah, I think that's a good place too, because I kind of have a little bit question another question that may clarify this last one, because I'm under the impression that I actually read this from, I mentioned this book a few times, but it's from, I think his name is G.C. Dill Saver or Sayer, but he wrote the 3 Marks of Manhood, Priest, Prophet, and King, kind of why I read it, because of the podcast. But he actually talks about how Catholics like should be the best dressed in the room. Now, I'd imagine that me and GC differ a little bit on what the best dress looks like, but I think that's an interesting question, because I was having a conversation with somebody, and he said that no one's a Mormon because of their theology. People are Mormon, they're attracted to it because it's generally a lot of younger folks, people who are very passionate about it, and Mormons are generally like the best people I know. And, good looking, carry themselves way. They all dress very nicely to their services. And I guess my question is, like, where do you see is there a place? I think there is a place where you can go too far. I guess I'm not saying like, hey, bring your like swaggiest outfit and your most expensive to church, dress properly like you're going to a wedding to mass. But do you think that there could be? Is there a middle ground? I guess in sort of this way of, is it wrong for Catholic to care about their aesthetics? Is there, because I could see both sides. Where I'm under the impression that I think that sometimes the way that you dress can really help out. And if you look at somebody that's just objectively attractive in a way that's not necessarily like a weird sexual manner, but in a way that's like, that person has something about them, and usually dressing well will do that kind of stuff for people. I think that could be very beneficial. And I've seen it a lot of times in mass or just in culture where it's like, it seems like Catholics have just, really not cared for a long time, in the sense of we got flip flops and like football jerseys at mass. And on the same token, we have people like starting to dress like their grandpa, like right at 22, they graduate college and it's like, we're fully grandpa now. And I think there's a space like, am I wrong in that? Is that I think there's room for, let's try to at least, give it our best shot. I think there's room for sort of aesthetically pleasing desires and goals a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, it's all about decorum, and it's about making sure that, at least when it comes to mass, we'll just start there. There's a respect element. When we go to a wedding, even if it's a secular wedding, we still dress up out of respect for the people getting married. And same when we go to a funeral, and it's the same idea when we go to mass. We're just trying to show that we've actually put some effort into what we're doing there, and put some effort into our love and worship for God. Now, that's not to mean that you go there and it's a fashion show and you're trying to bring some attention to yourself. That's probably crossing over into a direction that it ought not to. But there's nothing wrong from what I've seen, what I've understood, and what I've read regarding the church's position on putting some effort into your dress and how you look. You don't want to go goblin mode either. You need to make sure that you're being respectful to the whole thing, and respectful to your family when you're with them, or just anybody that you're around. Um, Outside of mass, it's probably the same thing. I think that, for instance, if let's take a 50-year-old man, and if he is wearing, I don't know, a Minecraft T-shirt, and I don't want to, maybe he's got a kid or something like that, or his grandson, and it's just something that they've appreciated together and they've bonded over. I don't want to. It's not about Minecraft. I'm just using this as an example. But at some point, we're also supposed to put away childish things, and we also need to grow up, and we need to age gracefully, and not in a simple way, but in a way that we're also acknowledging who we are and putting some pride into ourselves, but not because it's ourselves. Putting in because it's meant to honor God.
Yeah. If I could make this in a clear, have you ever seen The Talented Mr. Ripley? It's also a book. It's with Matt Damon.
Yeah, some of it. It's been years, but yeah.
So I would sum it up as like, when I think about what we should look like as Catholics, if you guys have seen that movie, it's Jude Law in that movie. If we could look like that, basically like 50s Italy, like if we could all look like that, I think that's the direction that we should go to. So we could move on from that one. I just have a couple questions here. What do you think like the modern young Catholic looks like? And I'm not asking you to try to depict what's out there right now and say, okay, I think this is what they look like. But what do you think, I guess maybe they should, or your idea of what a modern young Catholic should look like? I don't know if that's too tough or too broad.
Like physically?
Yeah, almost, or like maybe things that they're into, or like everything. Like I'm kind of curious of sort of your take on that.
I have no idea. I don't know if I just went on a tangent about how they need to at least age gracefully, or acknowledge their age and their decorum. Beyond that, I think that's basically it. They just need to make sure that they're not. It's not for the sake of putting so much attention to themselves where it's prideful, nor is it that they are not growing up. Um, Now, the funny thing is, I do see Catholics, and this is just me, and I don't think I'm right either. I think that I could be totally off. Sometimes you see them sort of LARPing, where they're dressed like they're going to meet Tolkien at the pub, and they're wearing like fedoras and they got bow ties. This might actually be how they authentically look, and so I don't want to say anything against that. But it's more of like now and then my wife will spot that. And we're like, oh yeah, but that's us. We're
Yeah.
when I do that, I'm judging, and I ought not do that.
Yeah, if you went to Franciscan, you'd see a lot of those, which is interesting. I guess I just asked the question because I'm just kind of curious of sort of, I guess, a little bit of the aesthetics, but it's an interesting question, right? Because we're moving into a whole new age, and when you still have some people who like really, really want to be in the 1700s, and then you have some people who are like, you may be too far into 2022. So I guess I was just asking in the sense of like, I don't know, what does that look like? Sort of what are they listening to? Because I think when I think about what a modern Catholic would be, a young one, it's obviously someone who's modest, hopefully has a decent taste in style, understands how to dress at mass, um, is sort of reading and maybe has a little bit of an idea. I guess maybe like they have a place in everything, right? Like I think that's what we kind of hope modern young Catholic would be, to really attract all things. I guess what it really is like Pier Giorgio Frassati. I think that's what the modern young Catholic should strive to look like someone who could be sort of objectively attractive and did all these stuff, climbing mountains, and he had pipe in his mouth and all this crazy stuff, but was so fervently convicted into the Catholic faith. And I guess that would be my answer for that one. Okay, as we round out, as someone who is a Spotify playlist maker, a man, like I said, a true man of the people, you know what I mean? Let's go with, I'm trying to think here. All right, we're going to go with two movies, $2, and then two bands, artists, whatever, for the modern young Catholic trad. And now,
Okay.
if you need a more specific person, just maybe me. Maybe you're just talking to me. I need two of
All
those
right.
for you. Me as a people.
Okay. Good. Let's do one at a time. So what was the
Okay.
first one?
We'll do movies. Two movies first. Okay, and I'm gonna do. I'll have a little caveat here. I think we get it. Man for All Seasons. Those are good. Let's try to, as much as I'm not trying to disrespect those, but I think it'd be more interesting if you said, here are two really great sort of, I guess, quote unquote, secular movies, which puts you in like the 50s to 70s probably, but those are still great times for movies.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard to pick only two, so I'll just throw out a few though. One that comes to mind, people are going to laugh at me, Mr. Mom. Mr. Mom is such a great movie, and it was very tempting to actually list that as one of my three, and I think it's going to take an honorary position there. The reason why I might throw that out for a young traditional Catholic guy is because while on one hand people might argue this is not traditional, this is about a guy that is a stay-at-home father. The circumstance brought him to that. It takes place in the 1980s. It's in Detroit. He was an engineer. It's Michael Keaton that plays the role,
Okay.
and
Gotcha.
he loses his job, and so he is put in a position where he's at home and he's trying to find work as an engineer. It's very difficult. His wife goes ahead and goes into the job market because they need to have an income. So she's now working, and he's the one that's the stay-at-home father. It's kind of a lighthearted movie. It's cheesy. John Hughes wrote it. It's a really good one. But what I like about it too, and the reason why I might say this is good for traditional Catholics, is because it really does illustrate fatherhood versus motherhood and how they work in partnership with each other, and how one might try to fulfill the other role, and they could certainly do it. And they could put their effort in and rear their children very well, but there's still going to be something maybe missing. And it's it's just done very well, I think, in this movie, and it's comedic. I don't think there's a lot of good um, what's the word I'm looking for? Chemistry between Michael Keaton and Terry Garr in it. Maybe I would have recasted Terry Garr, but it's a really good one.
Okay. You have another one? Maybe.
Yeah. Um, I'm going to say two more very quickly. The Mission, which if you haven't seen it, it's really good, and that's a very Catholic movie. And
Okay.
it's De Niro and it's Jeremy Irons, and De Niro is a conquistador and converts. He goes through a huge conversion, becomes a priest, and the whole movie is about uh, repentance and forgiveness and trying to figure out if what direction one should take when it comes to attack, if it means martyrdom or if it means punching back. And it's a great one. I recommend that one. Last one, uh, I guess Serpico, Al Pacino back in 1973, where it's a true story. He was a New York City cop and he exposed the corruption there. And he's the only guy that's trying to do the right moral thing. And it's driving him nuts because no one's on his side and his life is falling apart because of it. I think now and then, as Catholics in the world, especially depending on where you live, I'm in DC, and sometimes we feel a little bit alone that we're the only ones that, and this isn't the case. There's a really good Catholic community here, but sometimes you look around and it's crazy how much pro-abortion stuff is out there and how much debauchery is being celebrated here, and it could feel very lonely at times, but it's also kind of a joy to be in that place where we're fighting back, even just in our home and praying and just living the way that we believe God wants us to in our vocation. So I think Serpico is really good. It's kind of a fun illustration of that in a minimal way.
Yeah, these are pretty in depth, and also I haven't watched any of these movies, so I feel a little bit. I feel like I'm lacking a little bit here. Okay, how about a couple books?
I mentioned one earlier, and I think that How the Church Built Western Civilization by Thomas E. Woods is a great one because it's apologetics and it highlights the contributions we've had to Western civilization. It's just interesting though. And if you don't want to read, there's a whole series of it on YouTube that you can watch. I don't remember how many hours it is. It might take a couple of days to watch the whole thing from
Mm.
beginning to end. But it's great. Another one, maybe um, Leisure, the Basis of Culture by Joseph Pieper. And I think many times we forget that leisure is not only important but necessary. And it's
Mm.
not because we might get burned out from our hustle and grind, but it's really because we're human and we need that and we need that time to reflect. That's why Sunday leisure is so important. It's really meant so that we can reflect on stuff that's greater than us. So I would say that one too.
Yeah, those I definitely want to get into that. I think the leisure one's a good one too, because I think a lot of us aren't sure how to use it sometimes as like a Catholic, because there's times when people who are working really tough jobs just want to sit back and be like couch potatoes, and there's definitely space and time for certain of the different activities of leisure. Okay, last one. I'm just gonna say music, because you could point that in whatever direction you want it.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, if you want to listen to good music, you can go to my Spotify. Spotify is free, by the way. I don't pay for it. You can just, but you're gonna have to listen to some commercials in the middle.
Oh,
But yeah, but as far as I'll say a few things. I really love '70s Brazilian funk and samba, and I think it should have had its day. It, I think for a lot of college students, they flocked to, and maybe this was before your time, a lot of them flocked to reggae. So they were listening to '70s Jamaican music, and it's good and it's fun. But I feel like '70s Brazilian funk should have had its day, and I don't think it did. I think it's very underappreciated. So maybe Jorge Benjor is good. Gilberto Gil, Gal Costa, Astrid Gilberto. They're all good. And then maybe just a lot of surf rock, whether we're looking at 60s surf rock or things a little bit more current. I think girl surf rock, like current girl surf rock, is actually better than a lot of the guys' stuff because it's a little bit more innocent, it's less debaucherous. So bands like Best Coast or the Summer Twins or Vivian Girls, I'd say them too.
Wow, that's fascinating. I didn't know where you're gonna go with that. That was that was some interesting ones to throw out. You know what I like? That's a little bit weird. I really love Spanish guitar. I think more people
Oh
should
yeah,
appreciate that stuff. That stuff's amazing.
like flamenco.
Yeah, I mean, like, there's one actually on Apple Music, and I just looked up Spanish guitar, and there's like this just playlist of it, and I just go through that sometimes. And it was after I watched Money Heist, so I was very much into sort of the Spain type vibe at that time. So I think that really helped
Yeah,
out.
no,
But
Gypsy Kings are great. Like I love that stuff.
yeah,
It's yeah, I agree with you.
yeah. So, anyways, I think that'll do. We're basically about an hour here. I don't want to take any more of your time. Thank you so much for coming on. I had a lot of fun. I think there's hopefully some room for more stuff down the road. I would encourage all of our listeners, please go check out Saintwave. There's a lot of great stuff there. And if you're young and you need some real inspiration on sort of the 80s and what good vibes look like, I'd encourage you to check out Saintwave. But thank you so much for being on. That wraps up this episode. We'll see you guys on the next one.